my name is Sierra Hipple, and I am a sophomore at the University of Utah this year. I observed this semester in an ELD3 class at West High School with Valerie Gates, who is a wonderful teacher and has been teaching ELD at West High for a very long time now. The ELD3 class is the third out of four levels that they currently have at West High School, so these students were pretty advanced in their skills with the English language. They were able to write sentences, read sentences, and really it was coming up with going over new vocab words and making sure that they were using all of their kind of dynamics and putting together sentences properly every single time that they were doing things. In the classroom that I observed in, there were 15 students, and there were about 25 desks, and so students would come in and they were able to sit fairly spread out every single day, as well as there was no assigned seating, and so they were able to sit wherever they want, which I thought was great because I could kind of switch around which ones were sitting by me each time, and that made it interesting because I could see how different students were reacting to the different activities, and why or why not they may not have liked those activities. West is a 67% minority school if you look it up online, and that is a very high percentage for most high schools. That's one of the highest ones in the area. But they do get a lot of new ELL students or ELD students pretty frequently throughout the school year, and so those students are joining the classrooms pretty frequently. So one of the students that actually came and joined our classroom a little bit later after I had started at West High was a student that was a sophomore, and they were told to go up to the board one morning after the students completed their daily do-nows, which is a sentence that they complete in the morning that usually has a significant describing word that they need to remember kind of what that word means and how to use it, so appearance or media or something like that. And so this student went up to write their sentence on the board and then read it to the classroom. And their sentence was actually perfectly structured. They actually were really strong in writing, and it was, at a job interview, your appearance should be neat and clean. And so that sentence there's nothing wrong with it semantically. It has two describing words, which is perfect. So then when the student went to go and read it, that's where the problems came in. And the student actually struggled with the R sound, which was something that I noticed quite a few different students in the class struggled with. However, this student completely struggled to say it in the word. It kind of came out like appreciation. There was just no pronunciation of that R sound in the word. And then with the word your, it was kind of separated off the end of the word, like you or. They had a very hard time with that sound in their throat. And this was an Indian student, so I don't know if that was something to do with their language or if they had not had significant practice with that word, if that's something they struggled with in the past, because clearly they have had some type of English lessons in the past. But that was something that Miss Gates did have the students. She made them kind of stay up there and repeat the sentence again and make sure that they were stressing that syllable and that they were really trying to pronounce that syllable in the word, just because it is so important. R's are a very strong letter in the English language. The second example that I have is that one of the mornings in class, a student came in, and it was this kind of like because it's the beginning of the day, so school starts at 7:45, but students are always coming into the classroom a little bit early, and I would always get there early. And as I was sitting there talking with Miss Gates one morning, there was a group of students sitting in the classroom, and they were all from the ELD class that I was about to observe in that morning, and one of them turned to her and asked her, Miss Gates, is it okay call fat? And Valerie was really great about it. She immediately went over and she was like, well, I will answer your question, but first we need to phrase it correctly. Who are you calling fat? And then she pointed out, she wrote it on the board exactly what they said, is it okay call fat? And she pointed out that we need to say to call, because that determinant makes it that we are doing something and that we are physically calling somebody that word, not just like if you're just saying call fat, it could be you're calling over the phone, like you don't know. So to call someone fat or to call a friend fat. So she wanted them to specify exactly what they were saying. But then as a class, once everybody else kind of came into the classroom, we started going over whether or not that was okay, because that was something that they clearly didn't understand. And in their language, like in Spanish, fat would be gordo, and that's not always something that you can't say to others. Sometimes calling people fat doesn't mean the same thing as it does to us in the English language in the U.S., because I mean, even in England, you don't know how that's different than how it is for somebody here. And so that was actually a really great question for me to hear, because it allowed me to see how differently all of these students are seeing this world and how they must all feel coming into this completely new culture and society that they don't completely understand. And so they could say things that upset people or anger people and not really know that they're doing it. So I thought this was great. And one of the first things that one of the things that Miss Gates said to them was that really what we should remember is that we shouldn't be commenting on other people's appearance or bodies unless we're being asked to. So unless somebody came up to you and said, hey, how do I look today, or something like that. And even then, in the English language, calling people fat is considered to be kind of a mean thing, and people don't want to be described that way. And so that was something that the class kind of agreed upon as a whole was, no, I wouldn't want to be called that, so I would not call somebody else that. So for my example, I was not able to actually bring home the student's actual piece of writing, just because it was part of a larger paper and Ms. Gates did have to keep it, but I was able to, I stayed after one day and just typed out the part that I wanted to keep, and so I'm going to read it out, and then I do have some of the little parts highlighted that I wanted to show you guys. And so the sentence that the student wrote was, sentences, actually very strong, very few actual spelling errors, and more just with the content and the semantics of the sentence having a few errors in them. So, the reading was, to comparing the city that is here with my hometown is very astonishing because there is no similarity between these two places. There are a lot of differences. Take, for example, my hometown police are corruptible, transportation is undescribable, drivers are reckless, and the place is disorganized. There is always crisis, conflicts, and fights. Compared to the city of this, from what I've noticed, people are willing to help you out. And so if you listen, I'm going to fold it so I can show half at a time. So, to comparing the city that is here with my hometown is very astonishing. Could be its own sentence. So because this is the first sentence of this paragraph, I would say that that should be its own sentence right there, that first sentence. And then we would also need to make sure that we point out to comparing does not make sense here. That determinant isn't going to actually go there. We actually want to just say when comparing. And that's just going over determinants with students again, and what positions you use them and what they mean, and why we use them. So then, no similarity between these two places. There are a lot of differences. Take, for example, so this sentence is not ending properly. Because there is no similarity between these two places, there are a lot of differences. There are a lot of differences. So that's how we would change the structure of that, is we would need to end that sentence here. That take, for example, is actually part of the next sentence because the student wants to talk about the examples that they are about to give about the police in their old city. And so I think that is really important to point out to the student, is that this really needs to be part of the next sentence. And that is just for the understanding and the connectedness of the topics that they're talking about here. And so then we would say, so my hometown, so if we were to fix that, take for example, my hometown police are corruptible. Transportation is, and the student had actually, they had this word crossed out here, and then they had rewritten it, and it was undescribable. So you can just see how they had tried to say understandable, and they just really hadn't understood themselves the sentence, just because that's a very hard one. There's a lot of A's and B's and D's, and they're all backwards to each other, and it's all the same sounds. And so they ended up going with undescribable, which they spelled perfectly, actually. So they did end up understanding that bubble ending, undescribed bubble. Okay. Drivers are reckless, and the place is disorganized. So this is one that I highlighted because I really wanted to go over this. So this student actually switched the Z here for an S, which is a common mistake that we read about in our reading quite a few times, just because that sound is made by both letters, and in most other languages they would have the S there and not the Z. So that is something that is very important to go over with our students and to make sure that they clearly understand why we're using Z in certain words and what words to look for that in specifically. So, and the place is disorganized is what we would need to change that to, Z-E-D being the ending. So then here we're just missing a capitalization, which is fine. It's a little space before the period, but that's okay, not too big of a problem, something that's easy to fix, especially with a new student that's just a sophomore, and so they have 2 more years in order to fix this with the ELD program, so that's totally fine, something we should definitely, hey, guys, remember, this is an easy concept, let's make sure we're doing this every time. So there's always crisis, conflicts, and fights. That sentence is a little bit short. If it was stood on its own, I would not know exactly as to what the student was referring to. So this sentence is a little bit out of context, and they would need to fix it and say somewhere in there where is there always crisis, conflicts, and fights, or why is there always crisis, conflicts, and fights? What is that sentence's use here? Why is the student telling us that there's always crisis, conflicts, and fights? What's important about that? And that's important to get across to them, is that we need to know something else about that to put it in context of this reading of well, in the inner city, there was always crisis, conflicts, and fights, and that would make sense because we know that that's in the city, and so clearly you wouldn't want to be in that city. And then the last sentence, compared to the city of this, from what I've noticed, people are always willing to help you out. So what the student is trying to say was, compared to a city like this, from what I have seen, people are always willing to help you out here. What the student is trying to say is how their new city, how Salt Lake, where they live now, is different from where they used to live. And so they really need to state, compared to the city where I used to live, because we don't know whether or not that's the city where they are now or the city they used to live. And then they need to say down here that this, always willing to help out, that's referring to the city that they are in now. So that's really important. So this writing was just about a student's thoughts and feelings on just going over comparing where they used to live compared to where they are now, which is Salt Lake. A lot of the students in this class are from other countries, and so it was really interesting to hear the students go up and share a little bit about what they had written when I was there that day, because all the students came from such different places and such different environments, and it was really interesting to see why they had come here, or what they thought of the environment here and the culture here, because it is so different for most of them. So that is all that I have today for my 3 examples. Thank you, and I had a really good time observing my class this year. I hope you guys enjoyed my examples.